She lost her husband. But what he left behind was even more shocking, a key to a hidden truth that would tear her family apart. This is the story of love, betrayal, and the courage to face the people you once called your own. Don't miss a single episode of our gripping family drama series. New stories are uploaded regularly, and trust us, you'll want to be the first to know what happens next. Don't forget to turn on notifications for more emotional family stories every day. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones we live through, or never dare to tell. Like, share, and subscribe now to HT Family Drama and become part of our growing community of viewers who believe that the strongest stories come from the heart of the family. Portland International Airport had always been a place of reunions for Julia Lawson. She had stood in this terminal countless times, waiting for Michael to come home from his filming trips. She knew the sound of the sliding glass doors as they opened for passengers. She knew the smell, that strange blend of coffee, rain-soaked coats, and jet fuel. She knew the look on people's faces when they spotted the one they loved, but today was different. She walked slowly through the customs gate, her black coat brushing against her knees. In her arms, she carried a small wooden urn, wrapped in soft white linen. She kept it close to her chest, the way she used to hold Michael's head when he was sick, afraid that if she loosened her grip, he might slip away again. Her steps felt heavy, each one echoing the reality that he was gone. Outside the gate, the terminal was alive. Laughter bounced off the walls. A child squealed as she ran into her father's arms. A young couple kissed so deeply they forgot anyone else existed. A group of friends held up a sign that read, "Welcome home, Dan," in thick blue marker. Julia paused in the middle of it all, the urn still pressed to her. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened the Lawson family group chat. Her fingers moved mechanically over the screen. Flight just landed. Can someone pick me up? She stared at the message for a moment before hitting send. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. She tightened her scarf. The drizzle outside clung to the glass doors like a gray veil. At minute 10, her phone chimed. Victoria, her sister. Busy with the foundation gala prep. Just get an Uber. Another chime followed. Her mother, Helen. Don't make trouble, Julia. Everyone's busy. She read the words twice, as if maybe she had misunderstood. But they were as cold and clear as the rain sliding down the glass. Julia slipped the phone back into her pocket. Her gaze drifted to the revolving doors where families met and embraced. Balloons bobbed. Bags dropped to the floor as arms wrapped around shoulders. The sound of reunions filled her ears. But none of it was for her. She walked to an empty row of metal seats. They were icy against her legs as she sat down. Her suitcase stood beside her like a silent companion. She held the urn tighter, the linen warm from her palms. Her eyes blurred, but she blinked the tears away. She had learned long ago not to cry in public. Her family called it weakness, and right now, weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. A woman in her 60s sat down 2 seats away, her face lighting up as a tall man approached. "Oh, honey," the woman said, standing to hug him. Julia turned her head toward the glass doors, as if the sight of someone else's happiness was too much to bear. Minutes stretched into something heavier than time. Eventually, Julia rose, pulling the suitcase handle. She stepped outside into the Portland rain. It was cold enough to sting her cheeks. She hailed a taxi, gave the driver her address, and watched the terminal disappear through the wet window. In the silence of the ride, her mind returned to the hospital in Seoul. The last time she saw Michael alive. His voice had been faint, but his eyes had burned with something urgent. "If things ever get bad, Jules, use this." In her memory, she felt the weight of the small bronze key in her hand. She had laughed at him then, calling it his spy movie moment. But he hadn't laughed back. Now, sitting in the back of a taxi with an urn in her lap and no one waiting at home, Julia began to understand. Maybe Michael had known this moment would come. The apartment was quiet in the way only absence could make it. Julia set the urn on the mantelpiece, its smooth wood a sharp contrast to the cold stone beneath. The linen wrap still held the faint scent of the hospital. Antiseptic mingled with Michael's cologne, as if it had absorbed the very last moments they'd shared. She didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she let the dim afternoon filter through the rain-smeared windows, casting muted shadows over the living room. The silence was heavy, pressing on her ribs. Her mind wandered back to the hospital in Seoul. She hadn't wanted to remember, not yet, but the memory pushed through like light under a door. It had been early spring, cherry blossoms just beginning to blush along the streets outside. The hospital room was small but clean, a vase of pale lilies by the window. Michael lay propped against white pillows, his skin pale but his eyes still holding the same curious light she'd fallen in love with. She'd been reading to him, some novel they never finished. When he cleared his throat softly, "Jules, can you reach into the drawer?" She frowned, setting the book aside. "Why?" "Just humor me." She pulled open the bedside drawer. Inside was a small brass key, looped with a worn strip of leather. The metal was warm, as if it had been resting in his hand for a while before he called her. "If things ever get bad," he said, his voice low, "use this." Julia turned it over in her palm, confused. "Bad how? Michael, you're scaring me." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "I'm not trying to scare you. I know you. You trust too much, and some people don't deserve it." "What's this for?" "You'll know when the time comes." She'd rolled her eyes, trying to push the tension away. "You and your spy movie moments." He hadn't laughed. He'd only looked at her in that steady, searching way he had when he was choosing his words carefully. "Promise me, Jules." And she had. The taxi's motion jolted her back to the present. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, perhaps sensing her mood, but said nothing. When they pulled up to her building, the rain had softened into a mist. Julia climbed the stairs to the third floor, her suitcase thumping on each step. Inside, she leaned against the door, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the hallway radiator. She pulled the key from her coat pocket. It was the same, warm from her palm, the leather worn smooth by Michael's fingers. She didn't know yet what it opened, but the thought of it made her chest ache. On instinct, she placed it on the small table by the front door, next to a framed photo of them on their wedding day. Michael's arm was around her shoulders, his smile wide and easy. Looking at it now, she saw something she hadn't before. The way his other hand, the one not holding her, was tucked into his jacket pocket, like it always was when he had something he wasn't ready to share. She picked up the key again. This time, she didn't set it down. The rain outside deepened, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. Julia stood in the quiet, feeling the weight of the brass in her palm, and knew with sudden clarity that Michael had left her more than memories. Somewhere in the city, there was a lock waiting for this key, and whatever it opened might be the reason her family hadn't come for her. 3 days passed before Julia worked up the courage to visit Michael's editing suite. It was on the second floor of an old brick building above a bakery on Hawthorne Boulevard, a place that had always smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. Michael used to joke that the scent kept him going when he was editing for hours without moving from his chair. Julia climbed the narrow staircase, her fingers trailing along the banister, polished smooth by decades of use. At the landing, she unlocked the door with the key she kept on her own ring. The hinges groaned, the kind of sound that made you think of all the times the door had been opened with laughter or urgency. Inside, the air was still, as if the room had been holding its breath since Michael left for Seoul. His desk sat in the far corner near a wide window, the blinds half drawn. Dust floated lazily in the shaft of light that managed to slip through, turning the room into a muted painting. Julia didn't move at first. She stood in the doorway taking in the details. The shelves lined with photography books and film reels. The mug on the desk, a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. His gray sweater tossed over the back of the chair, one sleeve dangling. Her throat tightened. She crossed the room and sank into his chair. The leather was worn, familiar, shaped by his hours of work. She let her hand drift over the surface of the desk, fingertips tracing faint scratches and nicks. Small, accidental marks made over years. That's when she noticed it. On the right side, near where the desk met the wall, the wood grain didn't match perfectly. She ran her nails lightly over it, and a faint click responded. A narrow panel slid open to reveal a hidden compartment no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, a slim silver laptop, 2 external hard drives, a leather-bound notebook with frayed edges. A thick envelope sealed, with her name written in Michael's neat block letters. For Jules, if... Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside were several folded sheets of paper, bank statements, photocopied contracts, and a single handwritten note. Jules, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you in person. There are things about your family, about the Lawson Foundation, that you don't know. I tried to protect you from it, but I can't anymore. The evidence is here. You'll know what to do. Love, M. She opened the laptop. The password prompt glowed against the black screen. She tried Michael's usual, their wedding date. And the desktop unfolded in front of her. One folder stood out, LF, Truth. She clicked. The contents poured out in a list. PDFs, photos, audio files. She opened the first set of images. Photographs of Victoria at a closed-door meeting with contractors notorious for embezzlement. Another file, a scanned memo redirecting millions from a disaster relief project to private accounts, signed in Julia's name. She stared at it in disbelief. She'd never seen those papers before, much less signed them. Her breath came faster as she clicked through more. Expense reports showing donations siphoned off for luxury travel. Emails between foundation board members about keeping Julia in the dark. A photo of her father shaking hands with a man whose charity license had been revoked years ago. She leaned back, staring at the screen, her mind spinning. Michael had been building this, quietly, piece by piece, while he was alive. And he hadn't told her. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he'd been trying to protect her. The bakery's scent drifted up through the floorboards, warm and sweet, a cruel contrast to the bitter taste in her mouth. Julia closed the laptop slowly, her hands still trembling. The key Michael had given her wasn't just for a lock. It was for this moment. The moment she would have to choose whether to face the truth or turn away from it. She looked out the window. The city stretched beyond, gray and wet, cars sliding past on rain-slick streets. Somewhere out there, her family was preparing for the foundation gala, smiling for photographers, shaking hands with donors. And here she was, sitting in the middle of proof that could bring it all crashing down. Julia didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, the laptop open in front of her, its glow the only light in the apartment. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the world wrapped in a damp stillness. She read Michael's note again and again, the words sinking deeper each time. There was one name buried in the last paragraph. Mr. Graves. Trust him. She'd met him once, years ago, at a small dinner party Michael had hosted for friends from his documentary work. He was quiet, older, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in more than he said. Now his name felt like a lifeline. Then the next morning, she dialed the number from Michael's contacts list. Graves. The voice was low, clipped. Mr. Graves. This is Julia Lawson, Michael's wife. A pause. Not the polite kind, the kind where someone is measuring their words. I heard. I'm sorry for your loss. He left something for me. He said to trust you. Another pause, then, can you meet me? My office. 1 hour. The office was in a building downtown, sandwiched between a law library and a coffee shop. Inside, it smelled faintly of leather and paper. Mr. Graves was behind a desk cluttered with case files and an old brass lamp. He stood as she entered, offering his hand. "You have something?" he asked. Not, "How are you?" Not, "Do you want to sit?" Just straight to it. Julia slid the laptop across the desk. "Everything Michael collected, bank records, contracts, photos. My sister and my parents are in all of it." He powered it on, scanning the files with a practiced eye. His jaw tightened once, but otherwise his expression didn't change. "This is enough to open several investigations," he said finally, "but it will get ugly." Julia sat back. It's already ugly. For the next 2 hours, they went through the evidence piece by piece. Graves asked sharp questions, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather notebook. His penmanship was neat, deliberate. Then he leaned forward. "If you do this, they will come after you. Financially, personally. They will make you the villain. Are you ready for that?" Julia thought of the airport, the empty seat beside her, the messages from her mother and sister. "I'm ready for them to know I'm not afraid." A flicker of respect passed through his eyes. "Then we'll need witnesses." That week, Julia followed Graves to meet some of the people Michael had quietly helped. The first was Anne O'Leary, 76, her hands trembling as she poured tea in a small kitchen that smelled of chamomile and old books. Anne's voice wavered as she told Julia how the Lawson Foundation had promised to fund her community art program for seniors, then pulled out at the last minute, citing budget reallocations. The program closed, supplies were sold off. "I was ready to give up," Anne said. "Then Michael showed up with 2 boxes of paints and enough money to rent the studio for 6 more months. He said it was from an anonymous donor, but I knew it was him." Nyoatua II was Luis Moreno, a veteran in his 50s with kind eyes and a limp. His apartment was modest, walls lined with books on history and poetry. Luis explained how he'd applied for a small grant to make his building wheelchair accessible. The foundation rejected him, saying, in writing, that his case wouldn't photograph well for promotional materials. Michael had visited a week later, handing him an envelope thick with cash and a handwritten note. "For the ramp, not the cameras." Luis's voice grew quiet. "He told me there are good people in bad systems. I think he meant you too." Each story Julia heard was another stitch in the fabric of Michael's unseen work and another weight on her chest. He had been fighting for these people while pretending everything was fine at home. By the end of the week, Graves had a growing list of witnesses and a clear path forward. "We'll start with a cease and desist. Cut off their access to your name. Then we move to the press." Julia nodded, feeling the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt since Michael's death. Purpose. She left Graves's office that afternoon carrying a folder of signed statements. Outside, the city smelled faintly of wet asphalt, the sidewalks glistening under a pale sun. For the first time in days, she breathed a little deeper, but deep down she knew the hardest part was still coming, facing the people whose blood ran in her veins. Monday morning brought the kind of rain Portland was famous for, steady, cold, soaking into everything. Julia parked 2 blocks from her parents' colonial-style home. She sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, listening to the patter on the windshield, her hands tight on the steering wheel. The folder from Mr. Graves lay on the passenger seat, its edges already softened from her grip. Inside were signed statements, photocopies, proof. Everything she needed to break the silence and burn the bridge. She got out of the car, pulling her coat tighter. Her boots crunched on the wet gravel of the driveway. Helen opened the door before Julia could knock twice. Her mother's expression was sharp, the kind she used when she thought Julia was about to embarrass the family. "Julia, what is this about?" "We need to talk." Helen's eyes flicked to the folder in Julia's hand. Her jaw tightened. "If this is about the money..." Julia stepped inside without asking. The smell of polished wood and faint perfume wrapped around her, familiar and suffocating all at once. A Victoria appeared from the hallway, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her dress was perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless, as if she were walking into a gala, not a confrontation. "You didn't call," she said flatly. "I didn't think you'd pick up," Julia replied. Victoria's gaze dropped to the folder. "You're being dramatic." Julia placed it on the entryway table, flipping it open so the contents were visible. Contracts, photos, bank statements. "This is theft, fraud, and forging my name? That's personal." Helen's voice rose, icy and precise. "Lower your voice. You don't understand how the foundation works." "I understand exactly how it works," Julia cut in. "It works by hurting people. People Michael was helping while you were stealing from them." Now, Victoria laughed once, short, humorless. "Oh, Michael, always playing the hero." Julia's hands curled into fists. "He was a hero, and you're about to answer for what you did." Helen stepped closer, her perfume sharp. "If you take this public, you'll destroy this family." "This family destroyed itself," Julia said, her voice steady now. From the corner of her eye, Julia saw her father standing in the archway to the living room. Charles Lawson, always the silent enabler. His gaze slid away when she looked at him. He said nothing, just like always. Julia pulled a sealed envelope from the folder and set it on the table. "Cease and desist. You can't use my name or signature for anything ever again, and if you try, the press will get everything in this folder." Victoria's face tightened, the first crack in her polished armor. "You think you can win against us?" "No," Julia said. "I know I can survive without you." She turned toward the door, but something caught her eye. In the half-open garage, a dusty box sat on an old workbench. Instinct told her to check. She crossed the concrete floor, ignoring Helen's sharp voice behind her. Inside the box was her wedding portrait with Michael. The frame was scratched, the glass cracked down the middle, splitting them in two. Julia lifted it out carefully, brushing away the dust. She didn't say a word as she walked back through the house, clutching it to her chest. At the doorway, she turned to her mother and sister. "Michael told me the truth matters more than image. I finally understand what he meant." Then she stepped out into the rain, the door closing hard behind her. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and cold stone. Julia stood for a moment on the porch, letting the rain soak her hair, her coat. The portrait in her arms felt heavier than it should, as if it carried all the weight of what she'd just done. In the distance, thunder rolled, and Julia knew the storm was only just beginning. 2 weeks later, Julia stood in front of a set of glass doors, her reflection faint in the morning light. The building was the downtown press center, a place where political figures and corporate executives came to control the story. But Julia wasn't here to control anything. She was here to tell the truth. Inside, the air hummed with quiet tension. Reporters milled around, adjusting camera tripods, flipping through notepads. The smell of coffee and damp coats filled the room. Mr. Graves stood beside her, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. "You're sure about this?" he asked under his breath. Julia nodded. "If I back out now, they win twice." When the press coordinator called her name, she stepped up to the podium. The microphone picked up the faint tremor in her breath before she steadied it. "Good morning. My name is Julia Lawson. Until recently, I served as a trustee of the Lawson Foundation, my family's foundation." A ripple went through the room. Pens lifted, fingers paused over keyboards. "I was proud of the work I believed we were doing, but I have since learned that millions meant for relief programs, community projects, and medical support were diverted into private accounts, with my name forged to approve the transfers." Flashbulbs went off, white light stinging her eyes. She reached into the folder Graves had placed on the podium and pulled out a single photograph. Her sister at a private dinner with the contractors from Michael's files. She held it up for everyone to see. "This is not hearsay. This is evidence. I have shared all relevant files with the district attorney's office, and I will cooperate fully with their investigation." A hand shot up from the front row. "Ms. Lawson, are you accusing your own family?" Julia met the reporter's gaze. "I am holding people accountable for their actions. Blood doesn't excuse theft. It doesn't erase harm." Another voice from the back. "Why come forward now?" "Because the man who taught me to tell the truth is no longer here to do it himself. My husband Michael spent the last year of his life quietly helping those my family ignored. I will not let that be erased." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. Julia could see the reporters typing furiously, the glow of phone screens as news alerts began to spread. In the corner, a live stream camera was broadcasting everything, meaning her mother, sister, and father were probably watching right now. She closed the folder and stepped back from the podium. The questions kept coming, but she didn't answer. This wasn't a debate. It was a declaration. Outside, the drizzle had started again. Julia stood on the steps of the building, feeling the cool mist settle on her skin. Graves joined her, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. "You just lit a fuse," he said quietly. "Good," Julia replied. "It's about time." From across the street, a woman in a blue scarf waved hesitantly. Julia recognized her. Anne O'Leary from the art program. Behind her was Luis Moreno, leaning on his cane but smiling. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The look in their eyes said everything. "We see you. We believe you." That night, Julia's phone buzzed constantly with messages, some of support, others dripping with venom. One from Victoria read simply, "You've ruined us." Julia deleted it without replying. As she closed her laptop, the city outside was alive with headlights and wet pavement, and for the first time in years, she felt the air in her apartment was lighter. The truth was out, but she knew, deep down, that surviving the fallout would be the hardest part. The days after the press conference felt unreal. Julia's phone never stopped ringing. Calls from journalists, former foundation employees, and strangers who wanted to thank her. Messages poured in from people she'd never met, sharing stories of broken promises, of projects left to die when the funding vanished. She read as many as she could, but eventually she had to set the phone down. Too many voices, too much noise. One evening, a week after the conference, she found herself walking along the Willamette River. The air was sharp, the water dark and glassy. Streetlights cast long golden trails across the surface. Her boots made soft sounds on the damp wooden boardwalk. She carried nothing but her coat and a small envelope. Inside was Michael's note, now creased at the edges from her hands holding it again and again. Mr. Graves had kept her updated. Investigations were moving forward. The DA's office had issued subpoenas. Accounts were frozen. She knew the process would take months, maybe years, and the cost would be high. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. Anne had called to say her art program was reopening, funded by a coalition of donors who'd seen Julia's speech. Luis had sent her a photo of the completed wheelchair ramp, his caption simple, "No cameras, just freedom." These small victories were like sunlight breaking through a long winter. That Sunday, Julia drove to the coast, a place Michael had loved. The weather was clear, the horizon wide and endless. She climbed down to a quiet stretch of beach, the sand cold beneath her boots. She carried the urn in both hands. For a moment, she just stood there, listening to the low hiss of the tide, the steady heartbeat of the ocean. "You were right," she whispered. "The truth matters more than image, more than comfort, more than family sometimes." She unscrewed the lid and let the wind take him. Fine ash lifting and swirling, carried out over the waves. The sunlight caught it for a moment, turning it silver before it faded into the blue. Her hands were shaking, but she felt lighter. She stayed on the beach until the sun slipped low, painting the water in streaks of gold and rose. Then she walked back to the car, her coat smelling faintly of salt and wind. In the driver's seat, she looked at Michael's note one last time before tucking it into the visor. Not as something to revisit in grief, but as a compass for whatever came next. 2 weeks later, Julia stood outside a small brick building in a quieter part of Portland. The sign above the door read, Michael Lawson Community Fund. Inside, the smell of fresh paint and coffee filled the air. Volunteers unpacked boxes of art supplies, books, and blankets. On the wall, a photograph of Michael hung in a simple wooden frame, his smile as bright as she remembered. Julia rolled up her sleeves and joined in. That night, as she locked up, she stepped out into the crisp evening air. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Somewhere, rain clouds were gathering, but above her, the sky was still clear. She thought of all the times she'd been told to protect the family's image, to keep the truth hidden, and she thought of the people whose lives had been quietly changed by Michael's quiet acts of kindness. She smiled, a small, steady smile. The storm had passed. And even if others came, she knew now she could face them, because she wasn't just surviving, she was living with the truth.